Welcome. In this video, I'm going to take a look at how we find those equations when we're modeling. So if you remember in the penny circle activity, they gave you an equation. If you picked a linear model, you adjusted those two red points, and then in the next slide, it gave you a model that matched your 2 points. And so these are some sample equations that Desmos came up with for you. Okay, but how did that happen? Well, there's actually a process that the computer's going through to get those. There's an equation, and we're not going to get into that math today, but we are going to talk about how you can do this. This is called a regression equation. And so we're going to talk about how to find a regression equation for a model using your TI calculator. Now, you're welcome to kind of explore this. There's plenty of videos online. If you don't have a TI calculator or TI-84, you're welcome to find one on the Casio or on the TI Inspire. You actually can do it with the online Desmos calculator as well. If you just Google regression equations on Desmos, there'll be some different options that pop up that you can learn on your own there. So I'll go through this quickly. Basically, there's a number of steps that you need to take in order to do this. So the first two are just kind of one-time startup options. Okay, so first thing you do is turn on diagnostics on your calculator. So you're gonna go to catalog, which is the second 0 button, and then you can either scroll down or you can hit the letter D on the calculator to take you down to diagnostics, and then hit enter on diagnostics on. And this will stay on until you repeat this process and hit diagnostics off. It's fine just to leave it on. Then you're going to turn your stat plot on. What this is going to do is it's going to tell the calculator that you want to graph points that are in list 1, comma, list 2. Okay? And so later on, you can see here, you're going to have data in list 1, list 2, and it's going to plot those as points. So this would plot the point 4, comma, 390, and so on. Once that's turned on, you don't have to do it anymore. For each new problem, you're going to have to enter the data that you have into the list in the calculator. To do that, you're going to hit stat, and then over to stat edit, and then you're going to go ahead and enter your data in L1 and L2. If you don't have L1 and L2, either email me or just search my L1 and L2 is gone. How do I get them back? And Google will probably help you. Once you graph them or you enter them, go ahead and hit graph. And that's going to give you your graph with the points plotted. Now, you may not see anything at first, and that's where you have to hit zoom and zoom stat to adjust your window so you can see all the points in your window. At that point, you need to decide whether you're going to use a linear or a quadratic model. And this is actually more complicated than I first thought, but just think about the scenarios. If the points are pretty much in a straight line, I would use linear. If they're in part of a curve, part of a parabola, I would use quadratic. Now, if you look at this example here, it seems to me like they're pretty close to a line. Most of them are in the line. You've got kind of a few points out here. Now, you could say this looks like part of a parabola, and you could say, let's use a parabola to match this data. And if you do, that's fine. It's going to work pretty good in here. But what happens is if you try to extrapolate it, you try to take a point out here, your parabola is going to give you a point down here. That's fine if that's what you want. But if the trend of your data is really going like this, then a linear regression is going to give you this as your prediction. And so this really comes into mathematical modeling and some of the decisions that you have to make. And ultimately, you have to ask yourself, do I want a linear model or do I want a quadratic model? And you're going to decide that based on the points, but then also sometimes just the scenario. There's one in the worksheet you'll see where it's looking at, I think, how many adults in the U.S. are over the age of 100. And you get points that look a little bit like this. And it's like, oh, that seems like it's part of a parabola, right? But does that really make sense that the number of adults over 100, as we keep going on in years, is going to keep increasing more and more and more? That eventually we'll have twice the population now that we have? Maybe. It just depends. And so you really have to stop and think about some of those things and say, does this make more sense to do with a linear function or a quadratic function? So in that example, I would probably argue for a linear. But all right, so I've kind of gotten long-winded there. Let's make sure we didn't lose sight of the goal here. So how do we get an equation? So set up your calculator, put the data in L1 and L2, graph it, hit zoom, zoom stat, decide if you want a linear or a quadratic, and then go stat calc. And then if you want a linear regression, you type linreg. And depending on the version of the calculator you have, some of you will have to put L1, comma L2. And then this part here, if you want it to automatically graph the line for you, you have to store the regression equation in Y1. And so to do that, there's a vars button, kind of by the arrows. You can hit vars and then choose yvars function Y1, and that will store your regression equation in Y1. So the calculator, you're telling it, hey, I want to calculate a regression. If you want quad regression, you just choose quad reg instead of linreg. And then this tells the calculator you're using L1 and L2 as your X and your Y values. And then this tells the calculator you want to store the regression equation in Y1. And so you can do vars, yvars, function Y1. Okay? When you do that, it should give you R, the correlation coefficient. If you're doing a quadratic regression, it will give you R squared. And from there, you've got your equation, and you should be set to go. So I think that's all I need to tell you. If you need more detailed instructions, you can walk through this step by step, and it'll show you what to do. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm looking forward to seeing how you do this and how you can use this with the COVID project down the road. Thanks, and hope you're having a great day.